Hi, welcome to e-learning lane with Brady Licht. And our question today is how can we use storytelling techniques to improve e-learning design? So, first off, we kind of need to start with what are storytelling techniques, right? Well, you know this from a lot of media that you've already consumed. Storytelling techniques are things like having an initial kind of hook, something that places people in the middle of the action. Things like building towards a climax, things like having a conflict, things like having a journey or arc that people go through, a conflict that they overcome. And when people are doing e learning or any type of learning experience, oftentimes they are going through a journey if the e learning experience is successful. They start off as someone who is, called on this quest of sorts. They go on this quest, they meet challenges along the way, they meet mentor figures, they have small battles, leading up to some ultimate kind of climax or conflict that they overcome and then come back kind of resolved with newfound wisdom. Now, obviously, this matches a lot of what Joseph Campbell outlines in The Hero's Journey, but that's just one storytelling kind of structure that you can use really to organize e learning. So, e learning, you can build a story throughout to help tie together all the different pieces of the experience. So, this can be something as simple as having a narrative for each part of the e learning experience. Maybe it's telling the same hypothetical scenario of someone going through an experience along the way with each assignment, with each activity. Or it could be something as complex as placing them in more of a role play scenario where they're encountering this problem and building up a resolution to overcome it, where they're really the hero of the story. Now, there are other storytelling models out there that you can use as well. I'm a big fan of Ursula K. Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction. And her whole idea about this is really that stories are vessels to hold ideas and to hold wisdom. Now, when you're doing e learning, of course, one of the best ways to transfer wisdom is by having people engage in a story. So you can use storytelling techniques simply in the way of having people communicate stories that they've encountered. If you have an engaging narrative, people are far more likely to follow along than simple rote text. Now, of course, it's going to be most successful if you combine that rote text with things like these storytelling techniques, but the storytelling techniques certainly still have a place to kind of make it more engaging, to draw people in, and help leave a lasting impact, right? She describes stories as, again, kind of vessels through which ideas and wisdom can be shared. Now, that's really useful because, when we're thinking of Joseph Campbell's theory and kind of your more traditional plot structure, we're thinking of building up towards this rising action, resolving it, and moving on. Whereas Ursula K. Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction helps us in remembering that e-learning doesn't have to have this like nice, neat hero's journey or kind of Marvel movie type structure, or kind of pop culture structure. Instead, it can simply be a narrative that ties together pieces of information, right? That's kind of the key idea here with this. Now, of course, beyond that, there's all sorts of other ways you can use storytelling techniques, right? Think of all the fairy tales out there. Now, fairy tales, right, are very simple tales that use all sorts of symbols and imagery, um, animal characteristics, all sorts of things to kind of convey these big ideas. Now, of course, you can do that in your e-learning experiences as well. Now, it's just as powerful to have, real people doing real things, but if you're doing an e-learning experience on interpersonal conflict, could it be done just as well through archetypes, through something that is a little bit more fantastical, right? Would that still get the same effect? Now, of course, that's going to depend on your context, who you're presenting it to, the audience, but it's something to consider. Now, you obviously want to test again, make sure that you're getting the results you want. You want to do prototyping early on to make sure that it's successful, but it is something that can make things a little bit more unique. And from a development standpoint, oftentimes it's easier to use things that are a little bit more symbolic than things that are purely, representative. Um, you could hire, of course, a whole bunch of actors, but if an animation will get across the same idea just as effectively, it's likely going to be a lot cheaper to produce than real world actors. Now, there may be times again where you need that extra level of fidelity, but symbols, more abstract narratives can still convey ideas critically. Now, the last thing I would say about storytelling techniques is that a story can be your entire e learning experience to an extent, or at least it can be a big complement to an e learning experience. I've seen great e learning experiences out there, digital learning experiences, where effectively the whole learning experience is set up as a TV show that participants simply watch. Now, will some participants have it on in the background like a lot of, mandatory training? That's possible. But from what we've seen, far more people are going to be drawn in by simply having an engaging product that looks like the media they would naturally consume anyways than by simply just hitting them over the head with the information. Additionally, by kind of taking off some of the traditional like quiz elements, the stop and start elements, the reflect elements, those things in there, you can make it feel a little less like an e-learning experience, which can lead to participants having more positive reaction, right? So if you're having a tough time with just buy-in with your e-learning, going the route of scaling back all kind of those best practices around e-learning, and any digital learning experience, scaling back all those instructional design practices and just telling a story can perhaps get greater buy-in than going with something that's a more traditional e-learning experience. So again, lots of different ways you can use storytelling techniques in e-learning. These are just a couple. Again, if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to my email in the course in the description below. And I'm happy to answer more questions as we go on. Let me know again if there is any way that I have not mentioned that you may be considering using storytelling in your e-learning experience. And then last but not least, if you could go ahead and rate and review this podcast out there, that would be very helpful. With that, thanks for listening. I appreciate it.